Child labor in history refers to the widespread employment of children in various industries, often characterized by long hours, inadequate pay, and unsafe working conditions. This practice, prevalent during the Industrial Revolution, involved children as young as 5 years old working in mines, factories, and farms. The systemic exploitation of child laborers was driven by economic demands, where children provided cheap and nimble labor suited for tasks unsuited to adults. Understanding this context is critical to comprehending the grim reality of historical child labor, reflecting the social and economic inequalities that arose alongside industrialization. The significance of setting the context of child labor in history lies in its impact on contemporary labor laws and child protection policies. The harsh realities faced by these young workers underscore the importance of evolving laws that safeguard children from labor exploitation. Highlighting historical abuses helps ensure society remains vigilant against modern forms of child labor, which continue to exist in some parts of the world. Two specific examples illustrate the severity of this issue in history. In 19th century England, children worked up to 16 hours a day in textile mills, operating dangerous machinery with minimal supervision, resulting in frequent injuries and fatalities. Similarly, in the United States during the same period, children worked in coal mines under deplorable conditions, with little regard for their health or development. These examples underscore the dire conditions and exploitation faced by child laborers, which were catalysts for reform. Supporting opinions from reformers like Charles Dickens and Hine played a vital role in enlightening the public about these conditions through literature and photography, respectively. Their contributions were instrumental in shaping public opinion against the misuse of child labor and advocating for change. However, alternative viewpoints exist, often highlighting the economic necessity of child labor in certain historical contexts. For some families, child labor was essential for survival, providing additional income in harsh economic climates. This perspective, while not dismissing the abuses, provides insight into the complex socio-economic factors driving child labor. This historical context influences the broader topic by emphasizing the necessity of ongoing vigilance and reform to protect vulnerable populations. Understanding the grim reality of historical child labor informs current practices, ensuring that progress continues and the mistakes of the past are not repeated. By examining the roots of this issue, we are better equipped to tackle its contemporary manifestations and strive toward a just society for all children. The concept of historical roots and evolution of child labor practices delves into the origins and transformations of child labor throughout history, providing a foundation for understanding its grim realities. Child labor refers to the employment of children in work that is detrimental to their health, development, or schooling, often characterized by long hours, hazardous conditions, and minimal pay. Historically, child labor was a common feature across many societies, often seen as a necessary contribution to family economies. It evolved through various economic and industrial shifts, particularly during the Industrial Revolution, which significantly intensified its prevalence and severity. Understanding the historical roots of child labor is crucial as it illuminates the socio-economic structures that perpetuated such practices and reveals the cultural norms that allowed them to thrive. By examining these roots, we can better comprehend the persistence of child labor in certain parts of the world today and the continuing challenges in eradicating it. Two significant historical examples illustrate this concept. Firstly, during the Industrial Revolution in the 18th and 19th century Britain, child labor surged with the rise of factories and mines, where children were employed due to their small size and low demand for wages. Charles Dickens' Oliver Twist paints a vivid picture of this era, showing the harsh conditions faced by child laborers. Secondly, in the United States, children worked in textile mills, coal mines, and farms during the same period. It wasn't until the Fair Labor Standards Act of 1938 that significant legal restrictions were placed on such practices. Several opinions support the study of child labor's historical evolution. It is argued that acknowledging this history is vital for implementing effective modern policies and practices aimed at eradicating child labor globally. However, challenges abound, including economic necessity in impoverished regions, cultural acceptance, and inadequate enforcement of labor laws. The controversies surrounding child labor often involve differing viewpoints on the necessity of child work in developing countries where economic survival may rely on every family member contributing. Some argue for a nuanced approach that considers local contexts and promotes safe, regulated work over outright bans, which might push children towards more dangerous, illicit work. This point connects deeply with other aspects of the main topic by highlighting the resilience of child labor practices despite legislative efforts and societal progress. It underscores the need for comprehensive strategies that address not just legal frameworks, but also education, poverty alleviation, and cultural perceptions, paving the way for a future where child labor is a relic of the past. The concept of socio-economic factors driving child labor refers to the economic and social conditions that compel families to send their children to work, often in hazardous and exploitative environments. These factors create an environment where child labor becomes a necessary means of survival rather than a choice. Critical socio-economic factors include poverty, lack of access to education, and limited job opportunities for adults. When families live in extreme poverty, the economic contribution of children becomes essential for household survival, perpetuating the cycle of exploitative labor practices. Understanding these socio-economic drivers is integral to grasping the grim reality of historical child labor. By examining these underlying issues, we can better appreciate why families felt pressured to subject their children to labor, despite its detrimental effects on their development and well-being. For instance, during the Industrial Revolution in 19th century Britain, the influx of families into urban areas, coupled with insufficient wages for adult workers, forced children into factories as additional earners. Similarly, in the United States during the same period, children as young as 5 worked long hours in dangerous conditions due to these economic pressures. Supporters of this analysis argue that addressing socio-economic factors is key to eradicating child labor, as it requires systemic changes in poverty alleviation and educational access. For instance, when countries invest in free and accessible education, families are more likely to keep children in school, thereby reducing the need for their economic contribution to the household. However, tackling these factors is not without challenges. Some argue that eliminating child labor could plunge families deeper into poverty if not coupled with increased adult wages or social safety nets. There are also cultural considerations, as some societies might view child labor as a traditional part of growing up or economic contribution to family life. Ultimately, socio-economic factors driving child labor profoundly influence the broader topic by highlighting the complex web of conditions that sustain this exploitative practice. These factors cannot be viewed in isolation. They interact with political, cultural, and legal elements, all of which must be addressed to create meaningful and sustainable change. By focusing on the root causes of child labor, we can better devise strategies to eliminate it, while also improving the socio-economic conditions that enable children to thrive in healthier, more supportive environments. Exploitative work conditions and the health impacts on children form a central pillar in understanding the grim reality of historical child labor. This concept involves children working in severe and often dangerous environments that exceed their physical and mental capacities. These conditions were typically characterized by long hours, minimal rest, hazardous settings, and a lack of basic health and safety protections. The significance of this point is profound, as it highlights the inhumane realities faced by children who were often seen as cheap labor during the industrial revolutions and in various agricultural and mining sectors. These work conditions not only exploited the vulnerability of children, but also left lasting physical and emotional scars that carried into adulthood. One illustrative example is the textile mills of the 19th century United States and England, where children as young as 5 were employed to work 12 to 16 hours a day. The repetitive strain of tasks like spinning and weaving in poorly ventilated and dimly lit factories led to chronic health issues such as respiratory diseases, stunted growth, and deformities from repetitive motion. Another example is the coal mines, where children worked as trappers, opening and closing ventilation doors, or as coal bearers, carrying heavy loads. These dangerous environments often resulted in severe injuries, frequent accidents, and exposure to harmful dust and toxins, leading to impaired lung function and lifelong health complications. Opinions supporting this idea emphasize the moral responsibility to protect children and the ethical failings of past societies that allowed such practices to persist. Advocates for child rights argue that exploiting children for economic gains is a gross infringement on their rights to safety, education, and health, rights that need to be safeguarded to ensure their well-being and development. However, challenges arise regarding historical context and economic necessity. Some argue that child labor was an inevitable part of economic growth and industrialization, providing families with much-needed income. This view often sparks controversy, provoking debates over economic pragmatism versus moral responsibility. This point interconnects with broader conversations on economic exploitation, social justice, and human rights, underscoring the urgent need to protect children globally from similar exploitative conditions that alarmingly still exist today. Addressing these issues influences modern labor laws and international agreements that aim to eradicate child labor, improve work conditions, and ensure children's access to education, ultimately preventing the repeated cycles of poverty and exploitation.